Hello mamas, and welcome back to the Pregnancy with Physio Laura podcast. I've taken a short break, but I'm back in your ears with what I think is probably my favorite podcast series ever. I'm so freaking proud of this series because I'm so personally invested in VBACs. For those of you who don't know what a VBAC is, it is vaginal birth after caesarean. If you don't already know, you can definitely go back and listen to my birth stories, but I had a vaginal birth after 2 caesareans, and I know what it feels like to be on that journey, that roller coaster, that questioning, the ups, the downs, the like indecisiveness, the being not sure or not confident. There's so much baggage around VBAC, right? And I just know from my conversations with women how important this conversation is. And I'm so proud. I'm so freaking proud to be able to bring this to your ears because this is what I wanted when I was going on my VBAC journey. I wanted to hear this sort of information. I wanted this comfort, this warmth, this reassurance for you to be able to pick the right path for you. So, I could cry. I'm so proud. I'm so excited to get this in your ears. It's actually been a long time coming. I recorded these interviews a number of months ago. But I'm excited to finally release it. So I have interviewed a few guest experts for this entire series. There is a 5-part series. So this is 5 different episodes coming to your ears. I actually will be releasing a second series later in the year as well, because I've got so many things I want to teach you and educate you about. But this is a 5-part series. And today's episode is with the wonderful Midwife Lauretta, and she's going to talk us through her top tips to prepare yourself for a successful VBAC. Midwife Lauretta is amazing. She is such a beautiful wealth of knowledge. And if you do want to learn more from her, you can find her on Instagram at Midwife Lauretta. But also go back and listen to, I interviewed her for our Empowered Birth series on the podcast. And she is episode 90 to 93. So I want you to go back and listen to those. We talk about so many different ways to prepare for birth. And it was really amazing. And we got amazing feedback on that podcast. So if you do like her vibe from this episode, please go back and listen to those episodes. But today she's going to talk us through her top tips to prepare for a successful VBAC. So she's talking us through the importance of choosing your care provider carefully and what you should be looking for in a care provider, the importance of debriefing your previous birth so that you don't get surprised by anything that comes up, so that you have worked through all your fears, emotions, you've released everything you need to before your VBAC. The importance of knowing that the success rates are high. And this might surprise you when you listen to this episode, how high the success rates of a VBAC actually are. The importance of planning for all possibilities, so the importance of having birth plans and preferences, and the importance of surrounding yourself with positive and empowering stories. So this is a wonderful episode. Midwife Lauretta has such a warmth to her, and she is just so supportive. I really, really like her vibe. Now, I also want to let you know what's coming up, because I want you to make sure that you are subscribed to the Pregnancy with Physio Laura podcast, because I do not want you to miss out on any of the episodes coming up, because they're gold. They're so brilliant. I am so excited, and I want you to subscribe if you haven't already. Click the subscribe button now. But I do want to let you know what we have coming up is some amazing guest interviews where we are going to talk about fact and fiction. So that is a big part of VBACs, is like, what are the actual facts? So we're going to be covering the actual facts and statistics and evidence around uterine rupture, having a big baby, inductions, going post dates or going quote unquote overdue. What are your actual chances of a successful VBAC? What do the statistics say around risk factors and all of that? We're also going to be talking about the importance of finding a supportive care provider and what the evidence says around choosing your care provider and how that influences your success in a VBAC. So much gold in there. I can't tell you how proud I am of this series, and I want you listening to this right now to share this with any mamas you know who are interested in a VBAC, who are curious about a VBAC, or who are struggling with their VBAC journey. Please, please, please share this podcast with them, because I know it can be a really lonely road for a lot of women. I've experienced that myself. I know women want this information and it can be hard to find on your own. So I've just collated it all in one epic podcast series, and I want this in the ears of any woman going on that VBAC journey. I really am feeling so passionate about this topic, as you can tell. So please, please, please do share this to any mama that you know who is on that VBAC pathway in any way, shape, or form. So enjoy episode 1 with the amazing Midwife Lauretta. I know you're going to love this. Let's chat about VBAC preparation. You put out a post which resonated really deeply with me. It had some amazing tips and advice for women who are wanting to start a VBAC journey. So can you take the mic and share with us your wisdom on how a woman might start to prepare for a VBAC?
Yes, I sure can, Laura. So I think a lot of these will be similar to preparing for, every birth really, but with a few more specifics for women wanting to try for a VBAC. So I think my number one tip would be around choosing your care provider and your place of birth. So we know that those two things are going to have a really important influence on the type of birth you have. Okay, so really do your research around your care provider. It's just so crucial. And we know there's some really strong evidence for birth outcomes for every woman, and being more likely to have a vaginal birth when you have continuity of care with a midwife. And Hazel Keetle is doing some research around this. She's a midwife, and she's done some great research around VBAC, so highly recommend looking her up. So we really want to have the discussions with your care provider, interview them. So if you're choosing a midwife or an obstetrician, if you're deciding to go down that path, ask them about their experiences of caring for women with a VBAC. Ask them about their statistics and their success rate, because it's all well and good to say that you're supporting that, but often what I hear is care providers say that at the start, and then as you get close to the birth, they start talking about things like, oh, well, this baby might be a little bit big, or those things that aren't helpful for you if you're wanting to have a VBAC. So that's really important. Talk to them. How do they make you feel when you're asking them questions? Do you feel like you'll be able to work in partnership with them rather than them being, up here and you down here as the expert, that you can have a really collaborative relationship with them. And even little simple things like their language, what are they using in their language? Is it really fear-based? Is it coercive? Picking up on those little cues will be really helpful. So really making sure that they're on board with your plans will help you, serve you well in having a successful VBAC.
And I think it's so important that you note to do that early. And it's never too late, but I do think if you go in and there's maybe a couple of red flags popping up, i.e. like, oh, they kind of sound on board, but not really, but I'll just go with it. It's so much harder when you hit 37 weeks and you're being faced with, you know what, I actually think it's safer to do another C-section, because you've just spent your whole pregnancy developing rapport with someone who at the final hour is not actually as supportive of VBAC as you thought. And you're much better off to have those hard conversations early where you go, you know what, it actually sounds to me like you're leaning towards repeat Caesar over VBAC, which is fine, but it's maybe not going to be a right fit for me right now, or whatever it is. But have that hard conversation early. And I'm just going to insert a quick personal story. I remember with my third, for anyone you should probably know my birth story right now, but if you haven't, I've done it on the podcast before. But I was adamant I was going to have a maternal assisted caesarean section. And it was really good. I didn't actually approach this. Did I? I actually think I did call my obstetrician when I changed my mind. And it was a flat out no for a VBAC 2 for me. And I was really, for private obstetrics, but I was really grateful for that, because I was so glad that I knew it was a no and I had to go elsewhere to explore that option, rather than it being like a, yeah, sure, but it's really a no. And then I would have carried out my entire pregnancy just to get to the end and then be told, you know what, it's actually not a great idea. So I was actually really grateful for that, because some So for example, private obstetrics, because I guess they get a bit more choice over who they can and can't take on, it was a flat out no. Whereas in the public hospital, it was a yes under a million different
Yeah.
guidelines for me, which I understood. But like you're going to get yeses and nos from totally different arenas. So it's not just if one person says yes, no, maybe so, that's the Bible. You need to look around and look at all the other options, because it's not so black and white. Like you said, some as well. Some hospitals will say yes, you can attempt a VBAC, but under this, and you have to then go, well, how does that sit with me? Because it's one thing to attempt a VBAC. It's another thing, I don't know, to be like boxed into this tight little, you have to have da, 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 da. And I think those sorts of questions as well, like, well, how far over, I do that in quotation marks, can I go if I'm attempting a VBAC? And can I be induced? Do I have to be induced? If I were to be induced, what are the different ways to be induced? Like asking all these questions. Do I have to be monitored? And what is the risk of all these complications? What is the risk of a cesarean? Like really, in a way, like grilling your provider on all of these things early, so that you're like totally hunky-dory by the time birth comes around, knowing all the different factors. Like if I have gestational diabetes, what does that mean for my birth? If I have whatever the case may be, like really just foreseeing all these things that might pop up. Anyway, I interjected there, but I just wanted to add that piece, because I do think it's so important to do it early days rather than, and if you get a hint that like, oh, I don't actually think this person's as supportive as their language might be saying one thing, but their vibe is telling you something else. I think it's worthwhile just exploring until you find someone. There's so many VBAC supportive practitioners out there. Or people who are at least willing to work in collaboration with you. And it might be tough conversations, and it might be a lot of, like give and take, but at least they're working in collaboration with you. So anyway, I'm going to stop talking. You carry on.
I love that's so important, Laura. I love all of that. And I was just thinking too, with when you're choosing your place of birth, like you said, what are the restrictions? It's like thinking long term. What monitoring is, what's your policy around monitoring for someone having a VBAC? Am I going to have to come in as soon as labor starts, which is not necessarily in line with, the guidelines now. The NICE guidelines don't actually recommend continuous monitoring for women having a VBAC in early labor.
Yeah.
Which is not often the practice that we see in hospitals or from a lot of care providers. So, sussing that out, because, we know you'll probably do better if you're more likely for your labor to progress, to have less intervention if you're in active labor when you get to the hospital. So all of those things that you talked about will impact the success or not. And I love what you said about, just the vibe of someone. I think we don't trust our guts. We ignore those feelings and think, oh no, it should be fine. And I know I've just heard so many women talk about this, and they know they ignored those signs, and they later down the track have gone, I knew I should have changed. They weren't the right one for me.
And in saying that, for those who need a little bit of Dutch courage, I have interviewed many women who at 39 or 40 weeks have changed care providers.
Yes.
So like it is also never too late if something really does not feel right, because you should always feel supported in birth. It is never too late to change. So I just want to give that permission for those women who are like, yeah, but I'm about to give birth any day. It's too late now. It's like, no. I've had women at the final hour go, not a good fit, I need to go somewhere else. And, that's not easy, that's for sure. But it's worth it for a lot of women just to feel supported, regardless. Again, this is where we remove ourselves, regardless of whether those women went on to have VBACs or cesarean sections. It's that they felt supported. They felt confident in themselves and their birth team. That's the most important thing. And if you're not getting that vibe, change.
It matters. It's not just about their practical skills. Like they might be really good at doing that. They might be really skillful, but if they don't make you feel safe, respected, supported, then like you said, never too late to change. Yes. I think a lot of women feel that it is, and it, like you said, not easy, but it's too important. Like if it's not feeling right,
I agree.
Change it up. Go find the right one for you.
Yeah.
So I think the next one I had was debrief your previous birth. So I think that's important for anyone birthing again, because regardless of, how that birth went, we all have these, these experiences that may impact us in our next birth experience. So, but especially so for women who have had a cesarean, and even from what you were saying, Laura, about your pelvis, when we spoke in the earlier podcast, just around feeling like your pelvis or your body was broken. And a lot of women who have had a cesarean, they feel a sense of failure. And of course, they did not fail in any way. It's having a cesarean is such a huge, it's such a huge experience to go through and to recover from. But it can really cut to the core of a woman's confidence in and belief in her body and ability to trust that her body can do what it needs to do to labor and birth her next baby. So I think it's so crucial. And that might just be with your care provider, who supported you in your last birth, or maybe with a psychologist or a midwife, or someone who can help you work through that, maybe talk through anything that you weren't sure about. Maybe getting your birth notes so that you can look at what happened if you're not clear on what led to the cesarean or things like that. And also, you want to know what happened and the specifics of the operation to make sure that, you're suitable to try for a VBAC, which the majority of women are. But it's all about, just getting that information and then, moving on to this next experience and going, well, I'll take the good bits from my last birth. Hopefully there were some, leaving the not so good bits behind and focusing on this as a new experience. This is a different baby. This is going to be a different labor and birth experience.
I love that.
Yeah. So I think that's a really important one. And similar to that, I think that mindset is really important. So doing whatever you need to do, finding some birth education that resonates with you and your partner to help you do that, and to start really being conscious of preparing your mindset for that, because those things might come up during your labor. We want to try and work on them beforehand, make it a little bit easier.
Would you believe in my first birth? So I've been teaching active birth well and truly before I fell pregnant. My husband and I did no birth classes together because I think I had that confidence, cockiness really, that like, oh no, I know what I'm doing, and I didn't really teach him a lot. I just kind of thought that I would teach him on the day. And I'm like, whew, did I set myself up to fail? There's so many other reasons, but that would have been helpful. And we truly only did a proper birth class for my third pregnancy and birth. And we were like, I cannot believe we have not done this until now. And it was so powerful. And so I do definitely vouch for doing some birth preparation together and having that epic support team. I cannot believe I didn't do it, but I think that's the path I had to travel. And I just remember, for someone who quote unquote knows so much about birth, I knew so very little when it came to connecting with my husband and being on the same page. And it was so powerful. I highly recommend doing a class together for any women out there, even if you're a health professional listening to this and you're like, yeah, but I know it.
Even myself, Laura, I knew that I had to do more to work through my own baggage. And that's how I discovered calm birth, because my husband and I did calm birth with my first pregnancy. And I learned so much. And it was amazing. It helped my mindset probably more than anything.
Absolutely. Yeah. Same.
Yeah. We don't know what we don't know, though, do we? It's that thing. We just So next up, I think this is a really important one, and maybe you could have it as a bit of a mantra too, to help with that confidence, is know that the success rate is high. So around 70% of women who try for a VBAC will be successful. They're really good odds, and I think if you can go into that and be like, yes, there's a really good chance that I'm going to achieve this, that can, again, comes back to that mindset and really focusing on what you do want and building that confidence in your body. Unfortunately, I was looking at the last Mother and Babies report for 2019, and there's not a very high percentage of women who try for a VBAC. So I think for women who had a cesarean with their first birth, it was in the 80s, 86% maybe of women who went on to have another cesarean. And of course, there's no right or wrong for that. But I do genuinely think that women aren't it's not presented to women as a viable option. And even RANZCOG, so our, the head of our peak medical body of obstetrics in Australia and New Zealand, they quote that for most women, there's very few reasons why they wouldn't be a good candidate to have a VBAC after a cesarean. So I think that, is really positive to know about.
I'd be very interested to know what the reasons were for the 80% of women to go on to have cesareans. Like if that was studied at all, to just know, like, yeah, whether it was maternally driven or whether it was more obstetric driven, and like, yeah, so fascinating. I didn't realize it was so high. And I agree in that I think when you're falling pregnant for the second time and thinking about birth options, I think VBAC feels like a harder path to walk. Like it's not this natural, oh, you either have a VBAC or you have a C-section. I think it feels like the default in so many ways is a subsequent C-section, and that VBAC's very much available, but like harder, like you have to really kind of push yourself onto that path as opposed to like the default being C-section. That could also just be my personal experience in the systems that I went through, but that's how it felt to me, that it was just a harder path to walk.
Yeah, I definitely think that's true from, looking after women who are coming in for a VBAC and talking to, family and friends who, objectively they might have had a cesarean and then they think, oh, I want to try. They have their appointment and then they're told, oh, no, we'll just book you in, because in some ways maybe it's easier for care providers to just book that cesarean. So it's not presented as a good option, and we need to change that. So hopefully your work on doing the podcast on a VBAC and creating that awareness will help as well. It's just knowing that you have an option, and that for most it's a good option, if that's what women want. So next up, I have planning for all possibilities. So as we've talked about birth plans, still planning for, what you would like to happen if you were to have a cesarean, even if you're trying for a VBAC, thinking about, like we talked about earlier, monitoring, movement, all of those things, working with pain, understanding, if you were to have an epidural, for example, how that would impact potentially your labor and your chance of having a successful VBAC, understanding all of that. And just putting those plans in place, maybe doing your preferences for a cesarean and going through that, so that then you've done that and then you can kind of let it go. So you're like, okay, I've prepared for that scenario. I know what I want. And now I'm going to get back to focusing on this scenario, this one that I want, on having a successful VBAC.
I think that's so important, because I think that almost gives you permission to surrender and like really then just relax into VBAC preparation when you've made that preference list for a cesarean, and like you said, you can let it go then. It's like, that's prepped, that's done. Let's get back on this sort of VBAC pathway. And I know for so many women who have maybe had a traumatic cesarean and they think, well, if this VBAC attempt ends up in a cesarean, I want it to be better. So I want immediate skin to skin, assuming everyone is healthy and well. I want music or dim lights, or my obstetricians to not talk about their morning coffee, or, like whatever it is, but I want a better experience for me, which is 110% valid. And I think it's really worthwhile. I think it's a great point that women should put in a preference list for both, 100%. And I guess, like you were saying earlier, you plan for it like you would for any birth. So I guess maybe that's what some women would do anyway, regardless of whether they've had a birth in the past or not. But particularly if you've had a negative cesarean experience, like thinking about what would make a positive cesarean experience, let's write that all down. I know for me, I was separated from my first baby for like half an hour, which was ludicrous, because I was healthy, my baby was healthy. It was just a hospital procedure. And I pretty much went in there like guns blazing second time and was like, I am not being separated. And they tried to tell me, hospital guidelines for staff shortages, blah, blah, blah. I was like, I don't care. I don't care. That is, for me, like the most important thing is my baby with me. And they did, because I told them that was a non-negotiable, mum's healthy, Bubs is healthy. So, I walked in there with a VBAC attempt, but I also had a very strong preference for some things if I were to have a Caesar, and it worked out well for me because I had a Caesar. So I think that's such a great point that you make.
And it's almost like it could be helpful working through that as part of the debrief, that was traumatic. Okay, well, if that was to happen, what can I do next time? Because, I didn't have that good experience last time, especially if it's an emergency. It can be hard.
Yes, exactly. Because you don't have the time
No,
to be able to,
do those things.
write that all down or
Yeah,
communicate that. So doing it in advance for sure.
yeah. Okay, and my lucky last is surround yourself with the positive. So, other women's stories, and just be mindful of what you're consuming. So, if trying not to let people download on you their traumatic birth experience. This goes for any birth really, but specifically for VBACs, there's some great podcasts that just are purely about VBAC. So there's an Aussie one called VBAC Birth Stories. I don't know if you know about that one, Laura.
I'm on all of them.
You're on all. I was like, yeah, you're totally all over that. I know you are. That's a really great one. And especially, so Hazel Keatle, the researcher I mentioned earlier, she's got an app on there, which is really great and might be really helpful. There's like a VBAC Australia support group. There's, you could look up evidence-based birth. There's some great, that sort of brings together, it's an American website, but it brings together a lot of the latest research around different things around labour and birth, but specifically VBAC. I love the Childbirth Connection website too. That's got some really great information about VBACs, statistics and that sort of thing. And you can always look up the RANZCOG one as well. And as I mentioned, they have, their statement on it that it can be really, for most women, it's a really good option. So just be mindful, listen to VBAC birth stories from other women in all settings, and just be mindful, try not to focus on maybe the negative ones, still being realistic, but because what we absorb is really important to our mindset and how we feel going into it. So
I think that's great advice. Yeah, thank you so much. I think listening to that, I'm like feeling comfortable and safe and supported. And I can imagine that so many women who I know walk into the VBAC world. And for me, it was such a roller coaster the first time I entered it. That was the hardest bit, is the emotional roller coaster of a VBAC for me. It was hectic. And I just think having someone like yourself just like lay it out, like work through steps 1 to 5, create this beautiful supportive environment. It seems so much less daunting for women to swallow that, rather than, I think sometimes I believe you can create those bubbles around you, like only hearing, the things you want to hear. But if you don't intentionally curate that, you can just be thrown with risks, death, bleeding, like all these scary things get thrown at you, and shame, and like, what are you doing, and are you crazy, and all sorts of projections. And it can be really, really hard to navigate that if you don't have the information on the other side of it. So I just think all those resources you mentioned are a really great starting base as well for women not knowing where to go, because I don't think they're necessarily widely available as well. And just curating the content and information that you want. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because I know with my second with my second birth, my first VBAC attempt, I joined all the Facebook groups, I listened to all the podcasts, and weirdly, they didn't vibe with me at all. I actually found myself feeling really icky about them, like I wasn't getting a good sense. And so I kind of exited out of all of that. I don't know what that was about, to be honest, but I just knew that this wasn't actually making me feel better. But then with my third, I joined them all again, and I don't know, something just clicked, something was different, and I got so much out of it. I felt really empowered, really confident. So I guess what I'm saying there is just take what feels good for you. Like you'll know when someone says something where you go, oh yeah, that's feeling really sensible, good, confidence, empowering, versus, oh, that's made me feel really funny, or I don't actually like reading this, going down this rabbit hole, whatever it is. So just really like be discerning with the information that you're gathering, and make sure that it's making you feel really good within yourself. So that's just my advice there. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. I know so many women are going to get a lot out of it. And I think the statistics you showed, because I know a lot of women want to know that, is so powerful. Like to know that the success is so high That is so important.
Isn't it? It really is. And even for me, I like even looking at it, I was like, is that right? Like,
yeah. I'll double check.
Amazing. Yeah, it is. I think we need to share that. We need to share that more widely.
I think it's that just movement with the times and the evidence coming through. Like you had mentioned previously that it takes 15 years for policies and things to change as evidence comes through. And I think of my mum's generation, she wasn't even offered a VBAC because back then, once a Caesar, always a Caesar was the going quote. Whereas these days, it's not at all like that. And I almost wonder if in future generations, it will be like, doesn't matter how many Caesars you've had, if you're X, Y, and Z, low risk, then go for it. Like I am just, it's interesting to see how things change. And VBAC is not what it was 50 years ago. That's for sure. So I think I'm just thinking of all those women who are listening to their grandmas tell them, like, I remember, I won't say who, but an older generation being really terrified about a VBAC because that just equals baby dying. It's just a really scary thing for that generation. And I totally got that. And I was able to be in a position where I could say, I totally get that you see that. That's not my belief. That's not what the evidence shows, but I'm also just not going to debate you on this. I can appreciate that when you grew up, that was 100% the mindset around VBACs, and that was scary, dangerous. It's not like that anymore. We know more now. We know better now. And I think it's really cool to put this information out there. So maybe send this to your grandma if you are listening to this and you're like, you know what? I need to help educate them because they don't know any better right now. Maybe shoot it on through if they know how to use a podcast.
I suppose I'd love if my nan could work out how. I can't even get my mum to work it out. So it might be a stress.
My dad thinks that like a Facebook news feed is people's personal messages to him. And I've tried, I'm like, so he'll comment on everyone's, Lauretta has said, what a beautiful sunny day. And he'll be like, oh, thanks for sharing that, Lauretta. It is a beautiful day.
Oh, that's so heavenly.
Dad, stop. Over 60 should not use these technologies.
Oh, I love that.
Thank you so much, Lauretta. You have been a wealth of knowledge. I know so many women are going to get a lot out of this. So thank you for joining me.
Oh, I really hope so, Laura. Thank you so much for having me.
Hello, mamas. I really, really, really hope that you loved the first episode in this amazing VBAC podcast series with the wonderful midwife Lauretta. As I mentioned earlier, she has such a beautiful warmth and care, and you know that she really, really wants the best for you. And I just love the way she approaches birth, and particularly VBACs. I think she's a wealth of knowledge. And if you want to connect further with her, you can find her over at Midwife Lauretta on Instagram. And you can also listen to her other podcast episodes that she did with me on the Empowered Birth series, which is episode 90 to 93 on the Pregnancy with Physio Laura podcast. So if you like her vibe and you want to hear more from her, please go check those out. They are amazing episodes as well. And I always love to hear from you, as always on this podcast. I want to know you're listening. I want to know what you're getting out of it. So jump on over to my socials at Physio Laura and tell me what you loved about this episode. Tell me if you have any follow-up questions. I want to hear from you. And I'm passionate about this VBAC topic. I really want to make sure that you're getting all of your questions answered. So please jump on over to at Physio Laura and let me know if you have questions or feedback or comments on this episode. But please, mamas, look after yourself, be kind to yourself. Education is so valuable, but at the end of the day, you need to just sit with yourself, make the right decisions for you. That's only you can do that, right? So just trust yourself. You've got this, mama. And I will catch you soon for episode 2 in this amazing VBAC podcast series, where we're going to be breaking down all of the statistics around what it takes to have a successful VBAC. So what are the stats, the evidence, the research? What does it actually tell us around your success rate? So stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, have a wonderful day. I will talk to you soon.